Please welcome TJ Kirk from Rocky Mountain Institute with his take on mo money, mo problems.
Thank you. All right, everyone, 5 more minutes. We can do this. As I'm sure you're all immediately aware, we're going back into the numbers, and there are 580 green squares on this page. This represents the total number of gigatons of CO2 left in our carbon budget, according to the latest IPCC report, in order to hold warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius with a 50% chance. And how are we doing on that? Well, between 2011 and 2017, we burned all the squares in yellow, but don't worry, the budget starts at 2018, which we burned all the squares in red, for a new record high of 37 gigatons just from fossil fuel emissions alone. This means that in 14 years, our current rate, we're done with that carbon budget. So when we project these things, we say we're immediately going to start going down on our carbon emissions, and somewhere between 2060 to 2080, we're actually going to go net negative, which is really ambitious since every year we keep increasing our carbon emissions. Which begs the question, where are our carbon emissions coming from? What is actually driving this? Well, we kind of know some of these culprits, mobility, buildings, and power come up a lot, but we don't talk a lot about industry, this 40% chunk that is driving a lot of this change and is going to continue to drive more of it in this growing, developing economy. So for those things we talked about earlier, power, we know that we can use renewable energy to bring this down. Mobility, we know we can electrify everything and simplify our transportation using more electric buses and those scooters that we all kind of love or hate. And at Rocky Mountain Institute, we know how to build energy-efficient buildings, even in the Rockies. But industry, iron ore, steel, copper, cement, concrete, transporting all our goods around the world, shipping, trucking, aviation, oil and gas industries, and as well as the miscellaneous industries of food processing, pulp and paper, and chemical processing. We're not bringing those emissions down yet, and this is a huge issue for us. In the United States, you can see that the indirect emissions from electricity do come down some, but generally the process emission, things like turning iron ore into steel, are not coming down. These are really hard problems to solve. And they're really important problems to solve because our steel footprint alone going out to 2050 will be around 100 gigatons. Going to 2100, it'll be 2 to 3 times that, which means if we can't solve these industry problems, we don't really have any chance of beating that carbon budget no matter how many EVs we have. And this problem is going to get worse because our population is growing, but more importantly, our wealth is growing. We're having more wealthy people in areas that haven't had wealthy people before. And do you know what people do when they get money? They buy things and they build things. And they have babies too. I don't know who said that, but you're right on. And when we buy things, we have to transport those goods that we manufactured somewhere around the world using those heavy shipping containers. And then we have to build these new buildings using steel, cement, and concrete. All these things that are incredibly energy and emission intensive. Which brings us to a rather hard question. Do we want to continue our current rates of consumption and die in climate change? Do we want to just stop the industries entirely, mandate that we cut them off, and we all suffer massive economic collapse and fight each other? Or C, none of the above? I had a suspicion we were going to do C, which means we need to find solutions to these problems. And these solutions are going to focus around technology, around policy, and around markets, because we think that the combination of all three of those is the way to drive this change. So for technology, we're still developing these technologies, but the ones we have now fall into electrifying everything so we can use renewable energy, using more green hydrogen, developing biofuels. Shout out to NREL for working on that problem. And then we need to develop this carbon capture technology if we're actually going to go net negative at any point in the near future. Then we need to regulate these things. These companies are global, they're massive, they have tons of lobbyists, but we have to find a way to do it. But then we need to implement a carbon tax yesterday, and we need to be a really expensive carbon tax. And barring that, we need to have a cap and trade system. And finally, we need to have market incentives. Once these prices are in place, hopefully consumers and corporate buyers will make the right choices. And if not, investors need to be informed of the risks these companies are taking with their own money and force them to change. And we need to have ways of telling the truth so we know that actually these things are happening. Now for the common complaints. A lot of people will say, if we put a carbon tax, all my prices will go up. No, they won't really. ETC did a great study and looked at this. I'm so unfortunate the slide messed up, but don't worry, your only price is going to go up on your airline tickets about 10 to 20%. The next point is that markets can change really rapidly. Between 2011 to 2016, the 4 largest coal companies in the United States had a market capitalization of $44 billion. By 2016, they were all bankrupt. Now, we don't want all these companies to go bankrupt, but it can happen with market changing quickly. So if you're born today, how long do we have before we need to go net negative? Ideally, that baby, by the time that they reach young adulthood, we fix this problem. If we haven't fixed it by the time they're like middle age, we're in serious trouble. And if they're an old man and we still don't have net negative carbon emissions, we're all dead. So what can you do about this? Well, ideally, you're either a billionaire or a CEO. All right, so if you guys aren't that, Vote in elections, vote with your money, donate to causes you believe in, set your car on fire, go car free. And to wrap this all up, as a wise man once said, it's like the more money we come across, the more problems we see. And I'm really hoping we can change that paradigm, so we got to do it quick. Thank you, everyone.